Today I'd like to go over lessons learned on the France protests. These have been going on for almost a year, I think, at this point, or at least several months. And I'd like to just do some quick bullet points and just discuss how this is important to add to your kind of mental library of current events to learn from. The first thing I'd like to go over is road closures. With the scale of the protests that are going on in France, major thoroughfares are being shut down. And they're being shut down due to very violent protests. Some, yes, are not. But I'm going to go ahead and say the majority of them are. And these road closures, when these protests first started to turn violent, like any other protests in the world, usually it's a flash protest. And if it's not, usually it's a mild protest that turns into, rioting and stuff. And those roads, especially when you're talking about the scale of Paris, of the city, and France as a whole at this point, you have entire areas that are inaccessible when those are going on. And if you have an emergency, say you live in a major city and you have an apartment or a house, and just streets away are those protests, well, all around those main streets, you still have all the people going to, coming from, you have law enforcement going to, coming from, and say you're sitting at home and all of a sudden your child is choking, and you call 911, you're stuck. The likelihood of having medical personnel get to your home or apartment is almost going to be non-existent. And you need to be able to be self-sufficient. And we're talking about in Paris. We're not talking about in Africa, in the desert. We're talking about in Paris, France, protesting being so bad that, you don't want to leave and you might be stuck there. And it's so widespread that you just don't know if it's going to be your area when this is going on. The other aspect of the road closures, one of the reasons that happens is because of mob mentality. And when you start having basically very agitated people being violent, and lately you have people that are there to encourage that activity, that gets other people, and then they get excited and they start acting crazy also and start doing violent protests. And that's why it's important, in my opinion, not being around those situations is the best activity, because you might not be the one throwing stuff, and you might be completely against those people throwing stuff, but you are intentionally putting yourself in danger. And you just have to be really careful, especially if you just happen to walk into something like that. I don't know how you would or could, but if you're looking at one of those protests that really is a true flash protest, that's why you always have to practice situational awareness. If people start forming up, and you need to be ready to get out of there. Another thing that happened, and this was earlier on in the protesting in France, was major disruption of goods. You had people that were either because they were protesting and were not going to go to work, and so they weren't delivering, goods to stores. They weren't taking gasoline to gas stations. They weren't going to power plant jobs. They, weren't going to the hospital to work, or they couldn't. Say they couldn't fill up their car because the gas station had no fuel. Then they are stuck, and that goes back into having a plan, because you might not be protesting and you might be outside of the city, but all the stuff to get you the gasoline and the groceries to take care of you, that system might fall apart. And yes, in the relative scheme of months and months of protesting, that didn't last that long, but it did happen. And that's just something to take into account, because you just never know the ripple effects when something becomes that large scale. And it is possible. So you just have to keep in mind on this learning situation from France that you might not be directly involved with protesting, but the results of those protesters still could affect you multiple ways. And all the normal protocols go into place of emergency preparedness, all the basics that I've been going over. And I hope this was helpful. I want to start going over some more of these current events that are going on, of not just saying this is going on, the world's falling apart, but I want to take a moment to sit back and say, okay, this is going on. We need to learn from it. We need to learn from Venezuela. We need to learn from France. We need to learn from wildfires and North Korea. We need to learn from Russia. We need to learn from China. We need to learn from all these various political cyber situations going on. And I'm hopefully going to do some more. Thank you for watching.